In our most recent podcast, Roger Parloff gave us an inside look at the Proud Boys trial, which has been underway in the U.S. District Court of the District of Columbia since January the 12th. In this follow-up to Mr. Parloff, who has been live tweeting the trial from the beginning, we asked Dr. Megan Squire, a computer scientist, how she applies data science techniques to track and expose what she calls networks of hate and extremism online. She has studied the Proud Boys since 2017. Dr. Squires has recently joined the Southern Poverty Law Center to continue her research. Megan Squire, when did you first become interested in data and at the same time in political data?
Yeah, so I'm trained as a computer scientist, and I worked in academia for many years. As part of my role, I would come up with research projects and carry those out. And I've always been interested in collecting large data sets about social issues, social problems. I studied software development teams for a little while and looked at how they were toxic to each other, folks on the team. And around 2016, I started looking at political discourse online in social media like Facebook, Twitter, things like that, and trying to understand how people were talking to one another in those spaces. Pretty quickly came around to the rise of the alt-right as a phenomenon, and shifted my research into studying those groups particularly, especially on Facebook at the time.
How would you define alt-right?
Yeah, so back in the 2016 timeframe, there was this sort of, a younger wing of conservative folks who were using social media, memes, podcasts, things like that, to try to reinvigorate some pretty old fascist ideas. And so they rebranded themselves as alt-right, so an alternative to the traditional right. So there were some figures at the time, Richard Spencer, I don't know if anybody remembers him, but he was kind of the figurehead of that ilk. Pepe the Frog, that was the sort of era, that was that era. But they've kind of fallen apart since then for a bunch of different reasons. And so that term has fallen out of favor. We don't say alt-right as much anymore. Also, the ideas that those guys espouse, those fascistic tendencies, sort of mainstreamed after 2016. And so the alt part doesn't really apply so much anymore.
Define fascism or fascist as you are applying it to this group.
Yeah, that's pretty tough. I might be stepping out of my wheelhouse a little bit here as a computer scientist, but typically we're looking at groups that are hard right, far right, racist, misogynist, anti-Semitic, any of those umbrella terms. That's the types of groups that my team and the folks that I work with study and try to understand. Hate groups, extremist groups, sometimes violent, always extreme. And yeah, we try to figure out how to define those groups, how to find them, what they believe in, and then how to label them, how to give them a descriptor so that other folks can understand what they're about and why they are dangerous.
Can you remember when you formulated your own views about political figures?
Oh, goodness. I don't know. Probably high school time frame, I guess. I remember going on some school field trips to environmental causes. I was like in the environmental club or something like that. And so we would go on trips. And I remember thinking that, what I was seeing was bad or negative or things like that. But it's been a while. I'm much older now. So I've seen a few more trips.
Where did you get your education?
I did my undergrad at William and Mary. I was a art history major, public policy double major. And then after I graduated, I worked for a little while in the art industry. Pretty quickly got assigned to the tasks of building the databases and administering the network and setting up web pages, which were new at the time, and realized that I really loved the computing aspect of what I was doing and the organizing the data and keeping everything sort of in line. And so I went back to grad school in computer science and ended up getting a PhD in that. So my story is a little bit different than probably most people who have taught or have, advanced degrees in computer science. I definitely did not come from that background. So
the Proud Boys. Last week in our podcast, we talked to a man who is live tweeting the Proud Boys trial, and got to follow up with you to find out what you know about the Proud Boys and what you studied about them.
Yeah, so they're one of the first groups that I studied when I mentioned that I switched my research focus to studying online and then offline political activity, especially on the far right. Proud Boys were one of the first groups that I noticed in my life, because they were actively participating in events on the ground in North Carolina, where I lived at the time. And actually, they still are to this day. But in the 2017 timeframe, they were showing up at rallies. They were hosting their own rallies, particularly around like anti-Muslim events, the MAGA style, Trump type events. And they were very hard for me to understand and classify at the time. So I was collecting a lot of social media posts and trying to understand, what their ideology was, what they believed in, and then cross-referencing those with who showed up at the events on the ground. And Proud Boys were so strange because they seemed to be promoting themselves as like a drinking club, right? Like this just casual social club. But they also had this very strange set of bylaws and a very specific long list of beliefs and things like that. So they presented a bit of an issue for me as a researcher, trying to figure out how to classify them and how to study them and who to compare them to. But yeah, so I've been looking at them for coming up on 5 years, I guess more than 5 years now.
What did you start to learn about them, and who's the one or two people in the Proud Boys that stuck out for you?
Yeah, I mean, originally I was looking at them more as a group trying to understand who the people were so that I could even answer that question. One of the things that I did right away was start building kind of a map, a network map of who is who in the group. And to do that, I used a couple different data sources. I used Facebook data, so who was joining the groups on Facebook, the vetting groups and the different interest groups, fan pages, that kind of thing. And then I also started collecting financial data about who was paying who within the Proud Boys. And my goal there was to understand the structure of the group. So who are the leaders, who are the followers, who's taking the money, who's giving the money, what kind of events are they hosting, that sort of thing. And after building out those network maps, it became pretty clear that there was a cell structure in the group. So there were geographically oriented cells, like clubs, basically, which we knew. But what we didn't know was who was in charge of those groups necessarily. Some of them we knew, but we didn't know all of them. And my work also revealed some cells that I didn't know existed and wasn't sure how big they actually were. So from there, I was able to identify, I think it was between 8 and 10 really powerful leaders. They were the ones who were kind of financially controlling the different regional groups. And I believe three out of those were on trial in this latest fracas due to J6 activities. There were also some other guys that weren't as connected to January 6th, but were active earlier in the Proud Boys. So,
at the table in the current case is Enrique Tarrio,
yep.
Dominic Pizzola, Joseph Biggs, Ethan Nordine, and Zachary Reel.
Yeah, Ethan, he went by Rufio Panman at the time. Ethan Nordine, Tarrio, and Biggs were definitely three of the leaders that made it into my research pretty early on. The other two were lesser known, and there was a whole cast of sort of B-list Proud Boys that aren't on this particular trial, but have been in all kinds of legal cases and investigations and all this sort of thing. So it's a pretty big organization. But yeah, those are the big five that we're thinking about right now with this trial.
So give me a sense of what you learned specifically about any of them, and how do you gather information from Facebook?
Yeah, so what I learned from building the network map of payments, for example, is that we'll use Ethan Nordine as a great example. He was named an elder of the group in 2019. So we knew that that they considered him a leader, but what we didn't know was just how financially connected he was. He was apparently taking dues for his chapter. He was, purchasing tickets, doing fundraisers, that sort of thing. So he was not only connected in a titular role, but he was financially managing a large portion of Proud Boys, particularly the ones in the Pacific Northwest. As far as how I collect the data, so that's, yeah. So So this is where the computer science part comes in. So at the 2017-18 timeframe, it was pretty easy to get data from Facebook. What the data that I was going after was the group membership rosters. So I would, tell Facebook computer programs, hey, I'm interested in this Proud Boys group. Give me back all the members, and it would. There was a little programmer feature called an API that we used to gather that data out. And so then I would move that data into the big collection, big database, and then set about drawing, pictures of it, making the network maps, and so on. Around the beginning of 2018, though, Facebook removed that feature. They no longer allowed folks like me, researchers, to get the data that we needed to answer those questions. And they said that they did that because of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where they were found to be, I guess, inadvertently, we'll say, assisting researchers who maybe didn't have such a good purpose behind what they were doing. They were actually like tricking people and sort of, building these crazy data mining machines. And so all of us got locked out at that point from the API at Facebook. So I had to turn to other sources to learn about Proud Boys. That's when I started the financial investigation. So what I did there was I used a different data source called Venmo, which is a payment system that the Proud Boys were using to pay one another. It's kind of like, I send you $10 and you send me back $5 or whatever for whatever we're doing. And so they were definitely using this system to pay one another. And that data, luckily for me, was all public by default. So I didn't have the issues with getting access to it like I did with the Facebook side.
Well, why would it be public by default?
That's a really good question, and a lot of people wondered that too. So Venmo, that was their rule, was that your financial stuff was public by default, they called it. You actually had to, when you create an account, you had to click through 5 different screens that confirmed that you understood that what you were putting on there was public. And so people just thought it was fun to send money back and forth with little emojis and little, cutesy messages on it. There was multiple studies that people did before, way before me, showing, folks buying and selling drugs on there and all kinds of, illicit stuff happening. There was even a news article about someone uncovering President Biden's Venmo account, I guess. And so right after that happened, they actually changed the policy. And so now it's no longer public by default. But during that heyday, the 2018-19 timeframe, the Proud Boys were using it just openly to transact business. They had everything on there from dues collection, so-and-so would pay so-and-so, here's your $20 for dues and $10 for the hat, so they were selling merch, they were taking dues. And then some of the chapters, especially the ones in the northeast of the United States, they were using it to collect money to rent buses to drive across state lines and beat up protesters at events and things. So, they were pretty brazen. They were using this tool pretty openly. So it was very trivial for me to construct a network of who was paying who for what. I got about 200 and some, I think it was 205 maybe Proud Boys, confirmed Proud Boys that were paying each other using Venmo. So it was an interesting network.
What kind of money are we talking about?
So that's another thing. On Venmo, you can't see the amounts unless they type it in the comment. So I could just see that person X was paying person Y, but I couldn't necessarily see how much, unless incidentally they managed to mention it. So I can't really estimate that. I did learn a few things though. They did type the amount that dues were. So I learned it was, for most chapters, it was $20 a month. I did learn when they were hosting events and that they were selling tickets for those events, because they would mention that in the comments too. So I learned a lot of things, but unfortunately the hard financial numbers were not one of those things. Later though, in 2020, I started a different project, which gave me a little bit more insight into a new way that the Proud Boys and other groups were making money. It had nothing to do with Venmo at all. But they were collecting money through video live streams. So they would host a live stream and like we're talking right now, guests and hosts and all of that stuff. But they would ask for donations during the stream. And I found a way to collect that financial data. And so from there, I was able to learn, exactly how much they were making, Proud Boys and other groups also, but how much they were making during these live streams. There was, usually it was pretty low, $50, $100 a night. But there was one night in December of 2020, so right during the whole Stop the Steal madness and before J6, there was a Proud Boy video stream that kind of just shocked me, because when I saw the graph come through on my screen, all of a sudden there was a huge spike on this night. It was the day that President Trump said, kind of enticing people to come to January 6th, and he said it's going to be wild. Remember that tweet that he did? It'll be wild. On that day, the Proud Boys got really excited, and their video stream donations went through the roof. Like, it was just, I think they earned 10 times more that day than they did on a normal stream. So it was about $2,500, I think, just for that one stream. Pretty good. That was pretty small potatoes, though, compared to some of the other groups I study that were much better at video donations.
Go back, though, to the Facebook and Venmo information. From your own personal philosophical view, what do you think of the idea of this kind of thing being public in the first place? Yeah,
I didn't think that Facebook should have allowed that API access. In fact, when I discovered that it was available, I was kind of shocked. But then I said, well, gosh, I do have this research question. Who's in these groups? So let me just collect the data while it's there. I don't know why they allowed us to get it. I don't know why it was. I guess if they're going to allow us to get it, I'm glad that it was free and open for everyone to use equally. But yeah, it did surprise me a little bit that was open. Venmo was also open. They didn't have as easy. By the time I got into the Venmo data, it wasn't as easy to scrape out. I couldn't write code to do it. They had blocked that, but I was able to construct the data set manually, right? So it was open and transparent. I just had to do a little more work. But with the Facebook data, not only was it open and transparent, but it was like easily downloadable, very, very straightforward for me to write programs to go get that data. I'm glad, I guess I'm glad they shut it down. I wasn't at the time. I was really, really mad because I had this big, longitudinal research idea and this whole plan of how I was going to study these groups and the memberships over many years and try to understand this, this big, hairy question. And so I was mad at first when they shut it down, but then I realized that they probably should have had it shut down to begin with. And it also freed me up to study other things I didn't realize at the time I would need to do. But since then I had to get more creative, right? And look for alternative sources for data. And I ended up answering more questions than just that one. So it was all fine. Yeah, it surprised me.
In the middle of this trial going on right now, one of the big issues is what came first, the Proud Boys or Donald Trump? From your perspective, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, they were each. It was both and. So we know when Gavin McInnes launched the Proud Boys. We know when he started it. It was October of 2016. So that's right before the election. Donald Trump is ascendant. Everyone's extremely excited about him, and on the right anyway. He's extremely excited about him and his his promise really for cracking down on immigration and anti-Muslim and just all of that. They were really, really energized. The extreme far right was very energized by him and his candidacy. And so I think probably maybe if we had to pick whether it was the chicken or the egg, maybe it was him first. But I think maybe with Proud Boys in particular, it was him first. But the rumblings about this alt-right and this very online meme-centered, misogynist, hateful, that there might be some room for that had been growing before Trump. And so that 2014, 15, there was an incident called Gamergate, which I don't know if you know, this is a very online reference, but it was pretty big in the social media spaces where there was a lot of hate and vitriol directed at women. It started off in the gaming community, but then sort of broadened out from there. And a lot of the figures that were involved in that movement ended up fueling these, what we were talking about earlier, these alt-right groups. And that energy, we see some of that with the launch of the Proud Boys too. So it's all of a piece, really. By 2016, 2017, this was definitely a symbiotic relationship. They were, the groups were feeding on Trump. Trump was feeding on the groups. And, the beginning of 2017, I think it was, every weekend it felt like there was some kind of Trump rally where they would meet up and, show of force in the streets. There was several in Berkeley, California, for example, that became known as the Battles of Berkeley, where people just felt emboldened by Trump and his his words, really, and his actions.
In the trial, the word Telegram comes up a lot. Have you studied Telegram? And in my limited look at where they're from, they're based outside of this country. Who are they? What do they do? And why would the Proud Boys be using Telegram?
Great questions. Telegram is so important in this space. And yes, I've studied it extensively. So it's a company that was started by two Russians, two brothers. They also previously had started a social media company called VK, which then I think it's now owned by the Russian government. They left Russia and are now in Dubai, where they run this little, well, it used to be little, it's not so little anymore, but this company called Telegram. It's a platform, so social media platform. It has some features that are similar to Facebook or Twitter. You can create a user account, send messages, that kind of thing. It does have some encryption features, which is one of the reasons why it got popular outside the US pretty early on. People wanted to use that messaging technology ostensibly with end-to-end encryption so that their communications couldn't be read by governments, let's say. Telegram, though, it's interesting. They've never really shown that they have actually implemented end-to-end encryption. They just want you to take their word for it. But anyway, that's more of a computer nerd discussion we'll set to the side. But assuming that they do have this, the app lets you create an account, message back and forth with people. And then it has some features that are similar to like Facebook groups or pages where you can kind of do more outward communication, more propaganda, we'll say, like you can post memes and share files and that kind of thing. It's very well known as an app outside of the US. It's up until 2020 timeframe was much less known inside the US. Very few, people used it because there were so many other social media options in the United States. But in 2020, some of the social media companies started cracking down on these bigger groups. Well, actually, sometimes before 2022, but Proud Boys, for example, there are a couple other these social media platforms that sprung up to try to be little, alternative, alt tech, we call them, platforms like Parlor, Getter, this kind of thing. And Telegram became just another one of those for groups who had been deplatformed or removed from regular social media for their behavior, such as harassing people or spam, that kind of thing. They got kicked off Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, and were looking for a new home. And Telegram became one of those choices. For some groups, it became the biggest and fastest choice for them. It had a lot of features. It's pretty easy to use. It's free. There's no ads, things like that. So yeah, a lot of groups like the Proud Boys ended up on Telegram.
How much can you study Telegram? How much is available to you?
I love studying Telegram. So it's basically a lot of the freedoms that I used to have on Facebook still exist for me to study on Telegram. So it's pretty straightforward to pull data out of there. Yeah, you can get a lot. I won't bore the audience, but you can get a lot of stuff.
Well, it is something like, I am not computer facile, but is it difficult? Do you have to have a computer science degree in order to be able to download information from Telegram?
No. Anyone can go in and read the content on there. That's pretty straightforward. And then if you wanted to make a copy of the content, they have little easy downloading. You just click to download. The kind of stuff that would require, big data expertise would be if I wanted to do a study, which I have done, let's say, where I would, download 10,000 Telegram groups, all the members, all the content, and then set about, doing a textual analysis of the content or that kind of thing. Or setting up bots to do automated scraping and stuff like that. And all of that's certainly doable, and you would need a little bit of, expertise in how to set that up. But yeah, they allow everything from simple access all the way up to programmatic access.
Define bot.
Oh, a bot. So yeah, Telegram has this neat bot infrastructure, we call it. So it allows you as a user of the platform to actually program the platform. So if you want to add a feature that it doesn't have, it has a way to let you do that. So people have been quite creative in coming up with ways to extend the feature set of Telegram. You can take payments on there. You can automate the moderation of your chat room. You can make people pass a test before they are allowed to join. You can just do all these little sort of administrative or interesting tasks that may not come with the platform built in, but you can add them on yourself.
How are bots used?
So then some of the ways that I just mentioned, like as performing administrative tasks or taking payments, doing little polling surveys.
I'm talking like negatively, though, when people, when you read the stories and they say that, all this is bot driven.
Yeah, so bots on Telegram are a little bit more mild, I would say. Some of them just perform tasks for you that are not politically motivated or whatever. It's more like just housekeeping tasks. But on other platforms like Facebook and Twitter, bots have certainly been used to great effect to automate user signups. So, I'm going to give you $1,000 and you're going to give me 1,200, Facebook accounts that all like this one page, to artificially inflate the importance of the page, or to make, make it look like there's anger where there's not, or to spread propaganda and that kind of stuff. And this has happened to pretty great effect on Twitter. There's, just constant wondering if people's accounts are inflated by bots, if bots are promoting content or retweeting things. Yeah, it's kind of a matter of constant debate. Some of the platforms have come out with a little bit more information about how they've, how bots are being used on there than others. I would say on Telegram, they're actually a little bit, the ones I've seen are a little bit more boring than all of that. Part of the reason is Telegram doesn't need to be exploited as much in that way because it's such a free-for-all. You can kind of do what you want on there, so there's not as much need to create evil bots to do it for you because you can just do it. Does that make sense? On Twitter, you might need to be a little more cagey and create robotic systems to get what you want, but on Telegram, you can just go on there and be a Nazi, and it's kind of just a wide open space.
Is it safe to say that on Twitter you can't say anything you want, but on Telegram you can?
That's pretty close. Yeah, I mean, both of the, there's some wiggle room there on both sides, and I have seen some content removed from Telegram, but usually it's the ISIS variety, ISIS chat rooms and stuff like that, child, sexual abuse material, things of that nature. But yeah, for the most part, Telegram's considered a Wild West.
What should we make out of the fact that the founders of Telegram came from Russia? And why did they leave Russia? And how or why did they end up in Dubai?
Yeah, I'm not really sure how they ended up in Dubai or why they picked that. I don't really, Pavel Durov is the main founder that still runs Telegram, and he's pretty circumspect about giving out a lot of those details. It is a private company still. Yeah, it's a bit of a mystery. I'm not sure some of the motivations there. A lot of things with Telegram don't make a whole lot of sense. I mentioned a moment ago that there's no ads, for example. It also doesn't cost money to get Telegram. So a lot of folks were wondering, like, well, how do you make your money? And on the frequently asked questions page for Telegram for a while, it was just like, this is a labor of love, and we just pay for it out of our own pockets. I think, So yeah, the whole thing is a little bit sketchy, let's say.
One last thing on Telegram. I did see somewhere a scale that over the last several months, the numbers keep going up. And the last figure I saw was 700 million users. I don't know what that means, whether that's a day, a month, a year, but it looks like that they are getting more and more use if their numbers are accurate. And the reason I ask that is this an example of no matter what the United States government does about trying to control Facebook and Twitter and all this, there are going to be these internationalists where we can go to as people and use them with less restrictions.
Yeah, I mean, that's the internet, right? It's this borderless system. We try to put borders around it with things like trying to guess where somebody's coming from and what country they're in and all this, but really, at its nature, it's borderless. So it's going to be very hard to control that kind of stuff. I think the big debate, or not debate, but the big focus of that kind of discussion right now is around the company TikTok, which is that massively popular platform that a lot of young folks are using. Well, folks of all ages really, but young folks particularly are drawn to TikTok. It's these short video formats, and it's a company that's owned by a Chinese company. And so there was some concern during the Trump era about the data and how TikTok was using data, what their rules and stuff were around that. And that issue is where I've seen most of that discussion, not really so much around Telegram.
In a recent article about you in the Washington Post, this statement was made: the Proud Boys did not take kindly to Squire's work. Have you been been threatened? Have you been? Give us the backstory on not taking kindly to your work.
Yeah, I would say it's not just Proud Boys. I mean, there's just a lot of. This is a very politically fraught area to be in. So everyone from the platform companies to the actual folks that are the subjects of the research, they have varying levels of disagreement with the work, I guess. And so Proud Boys is just one example of that. I have studied their finances. I have studied their actions on social media. I've, been to actual events in the real world where they've showed up as well. And so some of them are aware of me and what I'm about. And yeah, they try to make my work uncomfortable. So when I was at the university, for example, there was one guy in particular who kept trying to do rallies against me. None of them actually happened, but he did hassle me on social media, the usual kind of harassment behaviors. He also posted on Telegram, posted some of my private information. He paid a data broker company to run a dossier basically on me and my family, and posted that on Telegram. It's interesting. We were talking about how Telegram's kind of a wild west. So when I saw that he had posted that on there, I said, geez, let me get that taken down. That probably shouldn't be up there. They have policies about, posting private information and stuff. So I reported it, nothing happened. I'd wait like a month and report it again, nothing happened. This is where I learned the limits of Telegram's content moderation. They're basically, it's up to them what they feel like deleting, and there's no real recourse. So it was up for about 10 months, and I was talking to a reporter from Wired who was writing a story on Telegram, and I mentioned it to him. I said, they put a dossier about me up on Telegram, back in January. It's still up there. And he, in the course of doing his reporting, contacted someone from Telegram just, to ask questions about the report and mentioned this to them, and they took it down. But it took someone, a real journalist, I guess, writing a story about this and potentially calling attention to the fact that they have such lax content moderation, and that this was an example of that. But since that happened, I've heard so many more cases. In fact, there was another podcast that I was on where they interviewed women in Russia who were being targeted on Telegram, and their information was being posted. So this is not just a US thing. This is like anyone could be a victim of this. They just don't have, I think they just don't have the content moderation infrastructure that other companies have, and they haven't prioritized building that. So
you taught at Elon University for how long?
I was there for almost 20 years. So I think it was 19 and a half years. Yeah.
And why did you leave?
So that was hard. I loved my students. I loved my colleagues, academia, the life of the mind and all of that. I loved doing my research projects, but I really felt this urgency to be able to do the work that I'm doing, the research that I'm doing full time. So I needed to be able to focus. And the more I got into doing these kind of crazy projects with the big data and all these different far right groups and trying to understand this fraught climate that we're in, it just sort of started taking over my cycles, right? I felt like at the end there, I felt like I was working two jobs. I would do my research job and then I would do my teaching job, and I just couldn't maintain both of those. So I took a leave in, I guess, 2021, I guess that academic year, just to feel out like what would it be like to do the research all the time. And so I pieced together a couple of fellowships, one with SPLC, one with ADL, some other financing arrangements. And then I loved it. I decided that this is what I wanted to do. I was able to finally just set out a research agenda that was robust and then carry that out without having to, do another whole job on the side, I guess. But I do miss my students and my friends at work. So
What are you doing for the Southern Poverty Law Center?
yeah, so in September of last year, 22, I took on a full-time role at SPLC. So what we're doing there is very exciting in my opinion, but we're building what we're calling the data lab. And so this is going to be tools, techniques, humans, expertise, methodologies, all around tracking and exposing the, how the far right works, how the extreme far right works digitally. So in their online spaces, in their finances, in their use of cryptocurrencies, all of that stuff. And so I'm building just all of that infrastructure to understand the sort of next generation of intelligence gathering, really, on how these groups operate.
Where do you put the far left in all this?
I'm sure there's probably groups out there that study that. We have a mission at SPLC, which is to understand hate and extremism and dangers to democracy and all of that jazz. And so we end up studying groups that I guess most folks would classify as right, extreme far right type of groups. But the tools and techniques that I use, you could study anything with them. It doesn't even have to be a political cause. When I'm looking at, for example, tracing cryptocurrency, the techniques that I use there could be used for cybercrime, for scams, and all kinds of other areas. So the tools and techniques, the computer science, if you will, is broadly applicable. What I'm finding is that a lot of the work that I do ends up being able to be used by a variety of different for a variety of different purposes. It doesn't only have to be political.
Another name that is used, not every day, but it has been used a lot in the Proud Boys trial, is a man named Bertino.
Oh, yeah.
Did you study him? Who is he? And they point out in the article that the name he was using was Onatreb, which is Bertino backwards.
Yeah.
Did you discover that? Was that one of your finds?
Yeah, I mean, that's it doesn't take a computer scientist for that one, but yeah, he was doing a series of stunts down near Charlotte, North Carolina, where it was anyway. Some of the news media picked up on these stunts, and he got a couple interviews, and one of them I think was with the Washington Post actually, and he gave that name Onatreb, and I didn't think much of it. I just thought, oh, that's a weird name. I've never heard that before, but I remembered what he looked like, and he later showed up to a rally outside of where I live down here in central North Carolina. And one of my friends posted a picture of him on their social media and said, I wonder who this guy is. He's really harassing us. He's being really, kind of out of line. And I said, I think I know who that is. And I pulled the article from Washington Post. And as I was looking at the name, it struck me that it was backwards. And so I posted that to her, social media, and he was very displeased by this. He did not like that someone had figured out his ruse of spelling his name backwards. He was actually the one that a minute ago I mentioned wanted to host rallies against me and stuff at the university. So I think I don't know, I got him a bit annoyed with figuring out his little spelling trick, but
I think, wasn't he stabbed?
He did get stabbed, yes. So he was one of the participants on the December 12th, again, 2020, Stop the Steal pre-J6, that sort of let's rally in D.C. every weekend in support of President Trump, that kind of thing. He was one of the participants in that December 12th, I think it was, event, which at night had quite a bit of violence, mayhem of all sorts. And yes, one of the incidents was I think it was a mutual stabbing, or at least one or two stabbing. Anyway, he got stabbed in that, and it was quite badly injured, I think.
Did he plead guilty on this whole Proud Boys thing?
He turned state's evidence. So he decided to cooperate with the investigation, and yeah.
He hasn't been on the stand yet, but I'm sure there's plenty of time. With this thing's going to go on for a while.
Yeah, I think so.
But you say, or they implied you said in the Post article, that the trial offers the promise of long-awaited accountability.
Let's hope. I mean, these guys were really menaces to many communities, real world communities, not just online, but they would show up in real world spaces and harass people and just generally make people's lives miserable. And so, yeah, there's just so many folks that have been affected by their nonsense. It's going to feel really nice, I think, to folks to see some accountability from the top, Enrique, all the way down to some of these, more marginal figures. I think it's not over, though, because there are only 5 of them in this particular trial, and Proud Boys isn't, nationwide, or they like to think maybe even international size of group. So there are still, there's still some chapters out there that are doing stuff. There's still some energy behind what they're trying to accomplish, but this will be maybe not a death blow to the organization, right? But it'll be significant. I remember in the days after the Unite the Right incident in Charlottesville, that deadly day, the lawsuits that were filed after that really did take the wind out of a lot of the groups that were involved in the planning and the orchestration of that event. And so there's always a chance, right, that these kinds of moves, whether it's a civil case, criminal, whatever, that's going to it'll sap their energy, it'll sap their finances, it'll marginalize them to not be able to get new members and things like that. So
what is your sense? There have been 930 charged so far from January the 6th, individuals. They expect a lot more before it's over.
Yeah.
What do you think, what will all that mean? I mean, a whole bunch have pled guilty. There have only been, I think, 38, 39 that have been found guilty of such serious crimes as seditious conspiracy. I always mess that.
I know.
And there's still more trial. I mean, the Oath Brothers, there's another Oath Brothers trial coming up, I believe.
Yeah.
What's the impact on these, the Justice Department devoting hundreds of people to this project? What do you think will be the outcome?
I think it's incredibly important. I think it might take hundreds of people, and it might be some of those people's most important thing they'll work on in their career. It might end up being the biggest thing they've done, and I think that's important. There were hundreds of people involved, or thousands of people involved in this. There's some that are still unknown. Their identities are not yet known. And so I'm hoping that people don't just forget about this and brush it away, but that every single one of those cases is run through the system, and let's see how it comes out.
Do you find information when you're looking that the government doesn't have? And do you ever say to yourself, I'm going to provide this to the Justice Department because they may not have found this?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's one of those it takes a village situations. So yeah, the skills that, it just takes a lot of variety of different skills. And I know that some of the ways that I approach things as a data scientist might not be part of, traditional investigations and that kind of stuff. So typically they'll they do come to me, they'll ask, what's going on with the money here? Or who's this person or whatever? What do you have on this? And sometimes I can help and sometimes I can't. In the case of January 6th, I think, I was most helpful with some of the groups, the America First crowd, the Nick Fuenteses, how are they earning money online, some of the pre-planning for the hype machine, a lot of that. But there were other groups that I was just less knowledgeable about and was not able to help with. But yeah, it's definitely, there's traditional investigative sources, there's confidential informants and all that kind of stuff. I don't get involved in any of that. But the digital side, I think, is there's always room to grow. It's such a fast changing way of doing business that they're not always equipped.
A couple of months ago, we all of a sudden had a story in our papers that a gentleman named Nick Fuentes was having dinner with Donald Trump, and things kind of exploded. Lots and lots of copy. Did you know about him? When did you find out about him, if you did? And what can you tell us about him?
I'm so glad you asked that because, yeah, I've been studying Nick's nonsense for a couple of years now, several years. So Nick is a very online internet performer who is active in that space we were talking about a moment ago, the video live streaming space. And so he basically has a nightly show, or it used to be nightly, where he would go on his little video stream, post it to YouTube. People would watch and they would donate money to him. He got kicked off of YouTube for being grossly anti-Semitic and racist, and then subsequently went down the chain of other platforms trying to find someone that would allow him to stay. He finally, around spring of 2020, settled into a platform called DLive. It's this like video game oriented platform where video gamers film themselves, stream themselves playing games, and other people watch. I know if you're not like a gamer, this might sound really weird, but trust me, it's very popular. So he would go on this site, but instead of filming himself playing video games, he would run his usual political show. That was terrible. This website, though, also had a built-in virtual currency that you could pay people, and then you could cash that currency out into real dollars. So Nick glommed onto this immediately and started soliciting donations on this platform. I built some software to watch him do this on that platform. So collecting all of the transactions for not just him, but about 150 other people in his realm, including some Proud Boys who were using this platform to do this, to spew propaganda and then get donations. I called this monetized propaganda. It's where they actually turn the words into money in real time. Anyways, built this software to collect down all the data, all the transactions, inbound, outbound, cash flow, who's giving, just all of that. Built this huge system and then set about studying it. And what I learned was that Nick Fuentes was the top earner, probably on the entire platform of DLive, but definitely within the sub-universe that I was studying of these extreme far-right actors on there. He was pulling down upwards of $10,000 a month. And in December of 2020 alone, through promotion of Stop the Steal and other, the whole pro-Trump stuff that was going on then, pulled in about, I think it was $44,000 just that month. So he was extremely skilled at leveraging his hate and his extremism and turning that into money, to real dollars. The question then is, like, what does that mean? Does he just put that in his pocket, or did he actually use that to support the events of January 6th or other things? And so that's what those, investigators were most curious about when they wanted the data. They wanted to see how much he was pulling down, and kind of what happened with that next. So it was a good project. It was very interesting, and no one else was studying it at the time. So,
what are you studying now?
Again, glad you asked that. So in about 15 minutes at noon, we're going to be launching a really long investigative piece that my colleague and lead writer of this article, Michael Hayden, and I have been working on for about 6 months into the text messages from Alex Jones's phone. So I don't know if you're familiar with Alex Jones. He runs a shop called InfoWars, right? Okay. It's sort of in the news recently for the giant judgment against him from the victims of the Sandy Hook massacre, which he falsely claimed was fake, and said they were all crisis actors. Anyways, in the course of that trial, his lawyers made the mistake of sending out the contents of Alex Jones's phone, the text messages on his phone, to the plaintiff's lawyer. Those texts were made public, I think yesterday. They're in the public record, and we're going to be publishing a story on what we found in those text messages today. And there's some, it's everything you think might be in those text messages. Mostly, I guess the most shocking thing to me, not shocking, but in illuminating thing to me that was in the messages was just how much of a disconnect there is between the persona that Alex portrays on his show of this, sort of strong man. I've got all the answers. It's all a conspiracy. Let me tell you how it works. And then the reality of his life, which is quite frankly a shambles and a complete hypocrisy. So it's going to be a banger, as they say. It's going to be 5 parts. So.
I'm sure you know this, but Norm Pattis was his attorney up in Connecticut for the Sandy Hook trial, and he's also the attorney for Joseph Biggs here in Washington at the Proud Boys trial. Go back to Alex Jones.
Yeah.
Been around longer than any of these people.
Yep.
Why is he up till recently, why has he been so successful?
Yeah, so he has a message that it purports to give folks the answers to difficult and uncomfortable questions. Why would something like Sandy Hook happen? And he says because it's a conspiracy and didn't really, that he's got quick and dirty answers to really tough questions, things you don't quite understand, mysteries. He has a deep and commanding voice, right? So his presence. He peppers his show with all kinds of antics and outlandish statements and comments. So some people probably tune in just to see some of that and end up staying for the conspiracies. He also has a pretty powerful set of products that he sells. So he closely ties the sales of the products to the conspiracies that he's promoting on the show. So you feel he gives you a way of taking action, right? So if you're worried about fluoride in your water, you can buy his fluoride-free toothpaste. So part 5 of our series actually on the text messages is going to go into some of that, the business aspect of that. But yeah, he's a performer and he's been successful so far. It's starting to catch up with him though.
Well, he was, what was it, over $1 billion that he was fined.
Yeah.
Whether that sticks or not is another thing.
The fine was significant. It was good. I think that really did send a message. I think what we're going to portray, though, in the story about the text messages is just how his life was already in chaos. He's just it's a dark way to live, and I think that comes through in his own words in the texts when he's talking to his family members, his colleagues, his father. Just how difficult it is to live this kind of life built on lies.
Where can people see this study? I mean, this podcast will run next week, so it will already have been released. But where can people find it?
Yeah, it's going to be on the SPLC's Hate Watch.
Southern Poverty Law Center.
Southern Poverty Law Center's Hate Watch. And I'm going to tell you, this is going to be a really big story, so they could probably just Google for, Alex Jones text, and hopefully it'll come right up if we've done our job right. But yeah, it's going to be a 5-part series. We'll have 2 pieces coming out this week, and then 2 the following. And I think the third week we'll just have the one final story.
Go back, and how did you get this information? These are texts from his phone.
Yeah, these are texts from his phone, which were downloaded. We're not sure really why. I was able to see how they were downloaded and the software that was used to do so, the dates and times and all that jazz. But it's a little bit unclear how they got into the possession of the lawyer and then why that lawyer gave them to the other attorneys. A little bit fuzzy there. But in any event, they are now part of the public record. And so it was my job to go through and try to figure out, all right, how can we take these 200 and some PDF files, just documents full of text messages, and how can I turn those into a thing that will allow us to search them and study them, figure out a day in the life of Jones, on March 15th, what did his text look like? So I built a system that would allow us to just ingest this much data. There's over 22,000 texts in the cache. So it was quite a job to get all those organized in a way that we could actually do reporting on it.
Anybody else have this same information?
To my knowledge, no, but I think there was one reporter from the Huffington Post who was given some of the texts about, I think he ran a story about Tucker Carlson. And then the lawyer for the plaintiffs gave the text to the January 6th commission as well, or the committee.
How did you get them?
Because Jones was, my colleague Mike developed a relationship with the attorney, and we ended up having them as part of our background study about Jones. So Southern Poverty Law Center has been studying Jones through our research division for, it has to be years now. And so we originally got these as kind of background of like, what is he about? What just give us more, tell us more of what he believes in and that sort of thing. Now that they're part of the public record, though, we'll be able to actually publish on them. So,
couple of quick things. Roger Stone, who was very close to Donald Trump, and he ended up pardoning him, was close to Alex Jones and would go on his show all the time.
Yeah.
And also the last time we've heard from Matt Drudge, he was in the Alex Jones studio. Is he in Dallas or Houston?
I'm not that familiar with Drudge. We don't have text from him, but I do have a ton of text.
I'm sorry, I
from
meant Alex
Stone.
Jones. Excuse me.
Oh, sorry. Oh, he's in Austin.
Austin. He's in Austin. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you were starting to talk about Matt Drudge. Do you know nothing about him?
No, he didn't figure in these texts, but Stone definitely did. In fact, the story we're going to release tomorrow, this is part 2, is all about Stone and the Proud Boys and all of that. And so it shows Alex's relationship with Roger pretty clearly. A lot of details in there. And Alex also communicates pretty frequently with Joe Biggs, who you brought up earlier. He's one of the Proud Boys that's on trial right now. And he communicates with some more smaller figures. There's a Proud Boy down in Florida who Alex communicates with frequently, and then another guy who's a kind of a T-shirt merchandise guy, and Alex talks with him as well. There's some others as well.
I'm not sure you want to answer this. Do you have children?
I do. Mm-hmm.
And the reason I ask this is, what's the age range?
They're in college now, all 3 of them.
What
Lucky me.
after your experience of seeing all this data and seeing how this internet is used, what do you tell people about how they should approach this? Approach texting, approach Facebook, approach Telegram. I don't care what it is.
That is such an important question, because I spend all of my day in this sort of track and expose world, right? Like, find the bad guys, figure out what they're doing. And my focus, all the time is on those questions. But really, for normal people, they don't really care about that as much. They wonder, how can I prevent my family from getting involved in this? How my kids getting involved in this? What do I say to my neighbor who's trying to tell me about QAnon? So SPLC does have a really nice, vigorous division that's dedicated to prevention and partnerships with outside orgs that do prevention work to build resilience in communities and to kind of answer those, honestly, more important questions, right? Like, how do we prevent this? And so there is a whole section on our website. I guess if I had to point to one resource, I would say the Peril Guide for Parents is really, really strong. This was developed in partnership with American University and their team there called Peril, which I can't remember what that acronym stands for, but it's about prevention and resilience in communities. And the guide that we developed with them, or that the rest of the team developed with them, it tells parents how to talk to kids, tells caregivers how to give advice, how to elicit and really communicate with your student, with the young people in your life, so that you can kind of head it off at the pass before they start, on a video game and someone approaches them with these kind of ideas. So yeah, we do have a lot of resources there, and I hope that we continue to build capacity in that area. It's really important.
Before I let you go, tell our folks that are listening how they can see your work.
I would tell folks to start at the Hate Watch section of the SPLC website. So this is where we run all of our investigative pieces, and there's links out to a lot of these other projects that the Intelligence Project works on.
Do you have a personal website that people can have access? I mean
Yeah.
your past work.
Yeah, I do. And it has a lot of links to my research studies and things like that. It's just at megansquire.com. So first name, last name.
Well, I have 150 more questions, but it's time for you to watch the release of your 6-month study. And Dr. Squire, thank you so much for filling in the blanks for us.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Booknotes Plus podcast. Please rate and review Booknotes Plus, and don't forget to follow so you never miss an episode. Questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at podcasts@c-span.org.